Our reading comes to us from a Here and Now podcast with Ram Dass entitled Love, Serve, Remember. I've told you about how once several years ago I had all these boxes of memorabilia, and every time I moved, I'd always have the shipping company move these boxes of old pictures and old love letters and important documents. Finally, I was moving again, and I just moved about 4 times, and each time it was just shipping and storing, shipping and storing. And I thought, why am I doing this? It's as if I'm holding on to my past in case I run out of future. Because in fact, I never opened the boxes. I just mark them and move them and store them, and then collect more and mark them and move them and store them. And I thought, I don't need them, so I'll burn them. I'll throw them away is what I decided. So I went through them and I threw it all in the trash can. Then I found myself in the middle of the night going out through the trash can because I woke up and I thought, oh my God, I threw away that. I go out and I was just going to save it. So I thought, no, I have to burn them. I mean, that's the only way to do it. So I started a fire in the fireplace and I started throwing in these things, saying goodbye and throwing it. And I milked the drama. I'll never see your picture again. And I threw it away. And now, if I look in my basement, I got rid of all of about 8 boxes then. But I notice I've collected more, and I have another 5 or 6 boxes down there now, at least besides the books. I'll probably have another burning because of both did I feel the sadness of losing my personal history, but also the lightness, an almost surprising lightness of, I don't have that anymore. It's gone. It's gone. I'm free.
Well, I hope everybody's had a great Thanksgiving weekend so far. We had a delightful Thanksgiving day. I heard from Tom and Joan through email. Tamara and I invited our good friend Randy Harris over. Some of you all know Randy. He's had this great program called Great Conversations in Las Cruces for many years. And we gathered, we had a non-traditional Thanksgiving meal. My wife cooked gumbo. We had gumbo, and it was quite delicious. So I take my hat off to you, darling, for the lovely meal. And we had a good time talking over lunch, talked about church and talked about life in Las Cruces, and had a chance to watch some cowboy football. And Saturday had a delightful conversation with my colleague, Gordon Bailey, who's the minister of UU Church in Las Vegas, Nevada, and his lovely wife, Lisa. And we talked more about Unitarian Universalism. So it's been a great weekend for me, and I'm grateful to be here this morning. Well, today I want to talk about Thanksgiving and history and how these two converge. On a Sunday morning in 1975, I went to my 9th grade classroom like I normally do every day, waiting for that lesson. When I got to the class, after a few preliminaries, the teacher told us that she was going to break us up into groups and that we would spend the class hour in these groups going through a lesson together that she had prepared. Easy enough, it sounded to me. Well, when the groups formed, I was the odd person out. All my classmates had gathered in these small groups in the room. but I was left sitting by my lonesome. I looked around, I was the only person sitting in the middle, but here's the kicker. I was the only Black kid in that classroom, and my teacher also was white. That school spelled Jordan High School, but I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. We called it Jordan High School. Was this school I attended for my 9th grade year during this period called desegregation. As I sat there, I wondered, why didn't the teacher do something to help me find a group? But when I look back on it, it was a traumatic experience for me. It was a harrowing experience to sit there for 1 hour in the center of the class, all by myself, just wondering, why am I sitting here like this? But when I look back on it, I realized it was a case of my personal history bumping up against American history. I was attending a majority white school because I was bused there during this period of desegregation. And though the U.S. Board of Education wanted to have mixed race schools, Black and white schools, it was clear that my classmates and my teacher did not. That experience caused me to see myself in a different light. I remained a fairly happy-go-lucky kid who was 14 years old at the time, but I was determined that I would not go back to that school the following year. When my 10th grade registration letter came in the mail, which we got every year during those times, it said I was to report back to Jordan. My sister was to report to Spencer, the school that was closest to our where we lived. But when registration came for me to go back to school in my 10th grade year, I did not go back to that school. My mother didn't know it, but I went directly to Spencer. And when I tried to enroll there, of course, I couldn't enroll because my name was not on their rolls. But within an hour of that morning starting the class, I managed to get a meeting with the school principal. The principal knew me, and he knew my father because my father was the president of the PTA when I was in junior high school, and that principal was then my junior high school principal. So he said, enroll the boy. And I enrolled, and that became one of the best years of my life. As you see, those two Sunday morning experiences impacted my personal history. I became a more self-determined individual and also began to see the world more clearly and as it was versus how I thought it should be. On the other hand, I realized my power and persistence enabled me to change things for the good. We all have a personal, family, and in this church, a communal history. Some of our histories are full of turmoil and trauma, like the experience I just described, while others are composed of the ordinary ups and downs of life's trials and tribulations of a typical life. Last Thanksgiving, my colleague from the Boulder UU Church preached and told the story of American history and how white settlers imposed themselves on indigenous peoples under the guise of the doctrine of manifest destiny. This Thanksgiving, I invite you to consider how your personal history intersects with this congregation of Unitarian Universalists as a way of envisioning the future or our collective destiny. What personal history do you bring to this community? How does your personal history intersect with the mission and vision of this community? And I wonder what life-changing experiences occurred that prompted you to join this church or to be a friend of the Unitarian Universalist community. My guess is that many people here have had life-changing experiences, traumatic experiences in other denominations or other religious traditions that forced them to say, I will not go back to that church. Perhaps their belief system evolved, and there was a fraught encounter with some religious elder who forever changed their lives and remained in their memory as a blot on their interior stained glass windows. The spiritual teacher Ram Dass was famous for the saying, "Be here now." And many of you know Ram Dass, who wrote a book by the same title. Born Richard Alpert, Ram Dass went to India to study with spiritual teachers around the same time that I was having my 9th grade experience in dealing with desegregation. When he emerged from his study, he had a new perspective on his life and who he was. In fact, when he wrote that book, it was so powerful, it sold over 2 million copies. So you can imagine how powerful that transformation was for him. From the story we heard, we know that he was somewhat of a nomad, was moving from place to place, carrying boxes of things with him, packing and shipping and moving and storing, moving and storing. In fact, Ram Dass said he had these boxes and he didn't even bother to open them anymore. He just moved them and shipped them, moved them and shipped them and stored them. Those boxes represented his personal history, which he said were comprised of old photos and love letters and important documents. But realizing he no longer needed those documents, he decided he was going to just throw them away. Like many of us have done when we moved, we just throw stuff away. So indeed, he threw the important things in the trash can, as we heard Katie tell that story. But as he slept that night, he was awakened by the fear of getting rid of his personal history. So he goes back out to the trash cans and begins pulling the love letters and the important documents out until he realizes the only way I can get rid of this is to burn it. So he did. And in Ram Dass style, he says he did it with all the drama that he could come up with, saying, I'll never see your face again. I'll never see your face again, as he drops the pictures into the fire. But he finished the task and he was a changed person. Having made up his mind to go through with the decision, he said, both did I feel the sadness of losing my personal history and also the lightness and almost surprising lightness of I don't have that anymore. It's gone. It's gone. And I'm free. He goes on to say, I think all of us, when you look at people, you often see people as like St. Nicholas. You know they're carrying this big bag of personal history, and they come in and they set it down and they're just exhausted. He goes on to say, God, this is who I am. This is who I've been. This is who my father was. This is who my mother was. He said you sit down on an airplane and you just say hello to your neighbor. And 4 hours later, you've heard their whole life story. He says they just keep reciting their story. They keep reinforcing their models of their own existence over and over again. My sense is that this church is at a crossroads regarding its existence and the future it wants to have. As the community makes decisions concerning the budget and the way it sees itself in the coming year, I believe it's a good time to ask the question that Ram Dass posed to us. Why am I, or why are we doing this? And he responded to himself. It's as if I'm holding on to my past, afraid of running out of the future. What past is this community holding on to? In our most recent history, we've done some powerful things in this community. We've let the community know that we care about Black and brown lives. We've taken care of immigrant people who have come through our community. And we've adopted the 8th principle. But the question remains, are we holding on to a past in case we run out of a future? As I heard Paula Cole Jones say last month, one bag of history that UU congregations need to set down is this idea of being a family. She says that by holding on to the idea that we are a family church, we keep ourselves in this community small. Now is the time to adopt the new framework that Paula Cole Jones committed to us, which is to be a community of communities. The church is comprised of many communities within itself, each of which has its own identity, purpose, and mission. When a community is viewed as a community of communities, I believe we can support the institution more vigorously with our time, talent, and our treasure. And it allows us to accomplish the big things that we set out to do when Tamara and I arrived here 3 years ago. Our pledge drive has indeed come in below expectations. And I imagine everyone believes that they have done the best that they can. It's been a long and difficult 20 months. Members have died. Some have moved away. In fact, I received a letter in my desk this morning from our member Jane DeCoyle, who says that her family has moved on to Maryland, and they don't anticipate coming back to Las Cruces, but they're going to join a UU church where they have landed. Some people just have moved on, which is a normal part of a church cycle. My hunch is that the pandemic, which is still raging, and we have now this Omicron variant, has caused people to re-examine their relationship with the church. No one's to blame. History changes us. And I'm expecting that, as you heard from Katie, a change in my status here. This is a unique moment in our history with this COVID pandemic. It's like we're all sitting in the middle of a room with everybody grouped around us. In fact, if you look at the COVID map right now, the US is just that. We're one big red blot on the world map, surrounded by countries who are yellow. This is, for me, a period of transition. And I believe it's a transitional period for all of us. So I encourage us not to hold on to a past because we're afraid of a big future. The great American Marianne Williamson said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." Friends, we are more than dollars, and numbers. We are a community of communities that is powerful beyond measure. But we have to show up. And this is what we heard from Lisa Bailey on Saturday or yesterday. Fear was so entrenched in the business leaders in Columbus, Georgia, it took 9 years for the Muskogee County Board of Education to implement the desegregation order by the U.S. Department of Education. Looking back on that 1975 classroom, it was clear to me there was a deep fear about empowering me. The teacher, in her inadequacy, left me without a group. In order for us to become a community of communities, as Paula Cole Jones has said, we've got to integrate new people into the group and embrace their ideas of change. We need leaders in our community who are free. We need new leaders to infuse our existing leaders who are exhausted. And I believe this happens when we commit ourselves to going into that community around us and spreading our message of love and transformation about our mission here in Las Cruces. We have to share that message with people who are afraid of running out of future. New people are showing up at our doors every Sunday and joining us for worship. And we love our visitors because they remind us that we are powerful beyond measure. They represent our potential for being a community of communities that doesn't leave anyone sitting alone. Turning visitors into members is what we're about here. But it has to show our commitment to set down the history of being a family church. If I could speak to that 14-year-old XK now, back then his name was Frank Chester, I'd tell him to say a few things to that white teacher. First, I want him to tell her that she's in a position of power to make all our lives better. By desegregating those groups in that classroom, she could impact how those white kids experienced a black kid. She didn't have to be a bystander or a perpetrator of an injustice in a 9th grade classroom. Second, I want him to say, I know you are a victim of reciting the model of your own existence. Those are the words from Ram Dass. You're a victim of mental conditioning. But if you choose, you can break out of your old patterns and act from a place of common humanity. You can change the perception of that 14-year-old black boy and alter the course of history. Third, he could say to her, I didn't choose to be born in this black body any more than you chose to be born in a white body. But underneath the skin, we're both human bodies in search of a new body of history that sets us free from our exhausted history that keeps us both in unconscious bondage. I want him to say, Miss, you can create a new history or a new her story beginning now. Choose a history grounded in the principle of inherent worth and dignity. What do you say to that, Miss? But here's something to keep in mind, Tamara Kachela. that I heard from my colleague and dear friend, the Reverend Russell Ellivan, who preached here a couple months ago. He's the UU Animal Ministry chaplain. He told me this a couple of days ago. He says, just because they have inherent worth and dignity doesn't make them good. Amen? You can have inherent worth and dignity, he says, and still be mean. But here's the most important thing I want that ninth grade teacher to hear from me now. I want the young XK to say, Miss, the cream always rises to the top. You can't keep it down. Pour some cream or powdered sugar on top of your coffee and you'll see it will stay on the top. Cream rises to the top. It's one of the few certainties in life. Her measly attempt to strip me of my worth and dignity was a measly waste of time. She didn't know that she was segregating a future United Methodist become UU minister, a future college graduate, a future husband, a future family provider, a university professor, a seminary professor, a PhD, a person with 4 degrees, a person that now chooses to stand in the center of the room. She didn't know what she was getting herself into. But history has made an impact on that Jordan High School. In 1975, the law mandated that the school have a 70-30 white-black student body ratio. Now the school has a 55, 27, and 12 African-American, white, and Latino student body. The school is ranked 389 out of 409 high schools in Georgia. And 92% of the students receive a free lunch. I looked up the history of the schools in Columbus, Georgia, and you just never know who's sitting in a classroom. 10 years before my graduating class, in the school that was between Jordan High School, and where we live was Columbus High School. And in one of those classrooms sat the future CEO of Aflac. You never know who you're talking to. This morning, I asked the church, what kind of history or herstory are we creating here? As we move into this holiday season, now is the time to remember the future. Now is the time to make up our collective minds that we won't go back into the past. Bruce Lee, when describing his approach to the martial arts, said, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. We don't have to discard our history or burn it down like Ram Dass did by throwing his important documents, his photos and love letters into the trash can. We can absorb what is useful and make a history that is specifically our own. I say to us this morning, let's conceive a future and act in a way that says to this community, we're breaking free of our exhausted history. We don't need that anymore. It's gone. It's gone. And we are free. Amen. Amen. Ashe, and may it be so.